welcome to MerpCon 2005. So, my life in Merp. I thought I'd say a bit about how Merp got started. I can introduce myself. I'm Chris Seeman. From 1993 until 2001, I published a quarterly magazine devoted to Middle-earth role-playing called Other Hands, which is now all PDF on merp.com. So for a good part of the decade, I did my darndest to try to keep the thing going and give people a chance to have their own publication, to put modules and rule things and stuff into it. Some of the people sitting here contributed to it in one way or another. And I also did a lot of writing for ICE and some for Decipher when they got the Middle-earth license. And so I can tell you a bit about how things worked on the inside and how we managed to put out what we did. But I wanted to start out with how I came to be in that position, because it was rather accidental. As a 10-year-old, I was fairly enthralled by the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings cartoon, which is how I got introduced to Tolkien. And I immediately went and bought the advanced D&D books, because I said, here are hobbits and orcs and all that kind of stuff. So that was interesting. And how did I begin to start running Middle-earth? Well, I was running module B2. If anyone remembers that one, Keep on the Borderlands, which was basically a dungeon crawl. But then at one point, my players decided they were going to leave the map. The map, the outside map of the place. So I said, well, what am I going to do? So I walked over to my bookshelf. I pulled off Karen Wynne Fonstad's Atlas of Middle-earth. I paged over to something that looked like where the dungeon could have been, and I just put it there. And so suddenly, by accident, the D&D campaign became set in Middle-earth. And it took several gaming sessions to realize the ramifications of this. We started to actually use the settings that we knew from the books for our D&D games, for our D&D modules. We just set them in Middle-earth, and gradually the thought started dawning on us, well, maybe we should just play Middle-earth, rather than D&D. But how would we do that? Because there's no games out there for Middle-earth. This was 1981. Little did I know that in Virginia, Pete Fenlon and a couple other people had just created Iron Rat Enterprises and had gotten a 10-year license to produce Middle-earth role-playing. And the next year, the first module came out, Angmar, and immediately we had material to play with. And so for most of the 80s, we played Merp. We used the settings. We created adventures based off of it. Then I think it was in the winter of 1989, I was at a Tolkien conference in Stockholm, Sweden, and I met a fellow there named Anders Blixt, who was a game designer, a Swedish game designer, who had translated, I don't know if he translated Merp, the rules itself, but he had translated some of the Merp material into Swedish, the Swedish edition. And so we just hooked up, and later on the next year he visited California and gamed with us in our game, and a year later he gave me a call and said, Chris, we're writing a Merp module, do you want to contribute? And I said, well, what is it going to be about? He says, well, it's going to be about the Kinstrike, your campaign that you've been running. And so apparently he had used all the ideas, taken all the ideas that we used in my game, and he had spun an entire module project out of this, and he had like 10 other Swedish authors working on it. That was this one. Well, what eventually became the Kinstrike. And at the time that he called, I was in Oxford at the Tolkien Centenary Conference, and I had recently gotten in touch with Tolkien Enterprises about creating an independent magazine for Middle-earth material, because at the time there were no magazines, game magazines, where you could publish Middle-earth stuff. I mean, you had ICE's store magazines where you could publish stuff using the MERP system, but I didn't have to use the MERP system, so I couldn't actually publish anything. So I wrote a letter to Tolkien Enterprises, which is based in Berkeley, California, different from the Tolkien estate. The Tolkien estate is Tolkien's children and their lawyer. They have no relationship with Tolkien Enterprises, which is about making money off of Tolkien's works and licensing products. My letter had come just at the right time because it was 1991, and ICE had got its license in 1981, so its license was coming up for renewal and review. And I think Tolkien Enterprises wanted to put some sort of pressure on them to make sure that they gave other people an opportunity to publish stuff, so long as it was not for profit. And so they actually helped us get other hands. The magazine started, and the next year in Oxford, I ran a panel discussion and got a whole bunch of people involved who would be interested in writing stuff for it. And so we had that going on, and that's when I got the call from Anders. So I ended up contributing to this module, which was really the first of its kind, I think, because it was the first large-scale MERP module that was actually scenario-based. The strongest element of MERP has always been the maps and the settings, the background material, because that's really the ace in the hole that Tolkien's world can give to role-playing that you can't get from other worlds. But it had always had sort of a dearth of a lack of good adventure scenarios. At best, you had, you go to an inn and you get hired to plunder a dungeon. Sort of basic, not very interesting plot lines. So I was really excited to actually work on a module which was pure plot, that was actually a grand campaign with a lot of interwoven scenarios in it. So it was sort of a turning point for MERP, and also a chance for me to actually get into ICE. After we had done this one, the Swedes, as I call them, the Swedes decided to write a larger source book module for Gondor, which became Southern Gondor, and I ended up working on that too. And they were very good adventure writers and world designers. Involved myself quite a bit in the editing, the actual text editing of it. And I did so much work on it, on the Southern Gondor one, that Jessica Nygren, the series editor at ICE, said, look, Chris, we have too much to do here in Virginia. We just have a card game underway, and that was one half of the Southern Gondor one. We have a card game underway, and I don't have time to work on MERP. You want to be the editor for the series? So I said, well, I'll have to think about that. Yes! So I became the editor, the assistant editor of the MERP series back in 1996. And so I worked on the revision of the Arnor module, in which we did a few changes and mainly corrected all the Elvish. I knew a lot of Tolkien linguists, linguistic experts who work on Elvish and Tolkien's invented languages. I knew them outside of the MERP arena, and so I said, would you be interested in checking this module out and telling us whether all these words are right? And David Sallow, who was the guy, said, sure. And since I was the series editor, I could actually offer to pay him to do this. And so from then on, we basically had sort of Tolkien experts, vetting all of the things that I put out to make sure that they were accurate. And interestingly, David Sallow, the guy who worked on this, ended up becoming the Peter Jackson's consultant for the films. He was the one who wrote all of the Elvish dialogue for the movies and the subtitles that you see. And my wife took me to the premiere of Fellowship in New York in 2001, and I had a chance to see Peter Jackson there, and I said, so why did you hire David Sallow for this? And he says, oh, well, he showed me this great resume of all these projects that he had worked on for you, and that's why he got the job. So that was sort of my small contribution to the movies. But anyway, it was a good situation because I was actually able to kind of guide and direct what the series was doing in its last years. And so we came out with a couple other modules which were almost entirely designed by gamers, basically. Me being the sole liaison to ICE, but ICE wasn't actually involved in them because they were doing other projects at the time. So we managed to get an entirely new realm module out. That was the Northern Waste, great manuscript. We got Hands the Healer, which was a profession source book, which basically it began as this. The main author, Mark Feil, had this compendium of herbs. Of course, coming from the Rollmaster world, healing herbs are all important, so he wanted to do a compendium of herbs from Middle-earth, from Merp. And I said, that sounds like a great idea, but I don't think anyone's ever going to buy it. And no one's going to pay $20 for a list of herbs. You need something more in there to make it more interesting. And so I said, well, this is a good opportunity to actually do what everyone's always complaining about, that Merp doesn't have an interesting magic system. And so what we ended up doing was the herb list basically became an appendix to a book on healing professions. And so for every single known culture in Middle-earth, elves, humans, dwarves, etc., we had different authors create different healing professions, some of them magical, some of them not, but unique powers or unique abilities for each culture. So we had a totally unique profession system for that area. And that had never been done at least in, I don't think Rollmaster put out anything like that either at that point. But that worked out very well. That was the last thing that we published. That was in 1997. At that point, ICE was beginning to lose money on the Merp series. Merp had actually been the second best-selling role-playing game in history in its heyday. But the books were becoming bigger, more unwieldy, and that is to say, of more interest to a very specialized audience rather than to a mass audience. And they're becoming more expensive to publish because paper prices were going up. So Merp was in trouble, and all of their money was being made off their card games, so they basically were beginning to back off. And there was one last ditch effort to turn out some really interesting scenarios by Jason Hawkins, one of ICE's employees. But unfortunately that didn't really work out because he wanted me to do them, but it was all his idea and I didn't have any real desire to work on those. But nevertheless, they were very good con games, as Chris knows, because he created a MerpCon back in California a couple years ago and had Jason Hawkins come out and run this campaign. Yeah. So it was sort of the last gasp of Merp in the official ICE realm, and soon after that, Tolkien Enterprises tried to actually succeeded in shutting ICE down for a while because they wanted to give the license, the Middle-earth role-playing license, to someone who would make them lots of money, which would end up being Decipher. So it was sad news for all of us at ICE and as people who bought ICE stuff. But other hands, the magazine still went on for a while, but then I got the same cease and desist letter that many other people did on the eve of the films because Tolkien Enterprises basically wanted to sweep the field clean of any other publications, whether they were for profit or not.
And essentially shut down production of any Middle-earth role-playing products at this point.
Yeah, it was the end of officially published stuff. But then around the corner came Merp.com, who saved the day by making all of this stuff available for nothing. So he has really been accomplishing what I was trying to accomplish for about a decade. And so we're actually in a much stronger position in some ways than we ever have been, I think, in terms of having access to all the material and it being deliverable in a very convenient internet format. Last chapter in the saga was Decipher, a very short chapter, as we found. Decipher actually had some good intentions, and the main designer of the core rules that they had was actually had a pretty good concept. And in many ways, the Decipher rule system was superior to the Merp one, I think, in some respects. The problem was that they waited too long to publish it. It was, I think, the core rulebook didn't come out after a year after the first movie came out, and they basically produced fluff for a couple of years. tying to the movies that were totally useless for gaming purposes. They came out with a couple useful source books, but that was it. It was, they themselves apparently had no intention of pursuing it any further than that. I never had any direct link with them apart from emails and a couple phone calls, so I don't know what went on inside the inner sanctum of the cipher. But my sense is that I get that they were not really interested in doing more than mass market products. So Merp remains sort of the unequal mass of gaming material that now is finally out there for everyone. They also languished under licensing restrictions, which ICE never had to worry about, which were essentially that you could never refer to anything from the Silmarillion or anything outside of Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, which created immense difficulties for giving any depth to Middle-earth. So there was really a short lifespan for that. And the consequence of all this, I think, is that first of all, Decipher taught us a lesson. That was that we don't need a license. We don't need a license to do what we do. And even if we had one, it wouldn't guarantee a good game. And I think that people who play and enjoy Merp have to take things into their own hands, as others have been doing, and really create the content that people are going to use for the next 10 or 20 years, to continue the good that has been started with Merp. And now we actually have access to a lot of people around the world, not just game designers, but also map cartographers like Thomas Bowinski. Hopefully we can get him to draw more of these great maps for us. I'm continuing to be active in my own games, and I think getting cons together like this is another way to bring things together. So that's where we stand at the moment. That's the state of the union. And if we want to talk about anything else, let's talk.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What are Christopher Tolkien's position on the Merp role-playing and all of that? I mean, is he for it, against it?
Yeah, the question is, what is Christopher Tolkien's position on Merp or Middle-earth role-playing in general? Is he for it or against it? I believe he is personally against it in terms of his own interests. He doesn't think, he has a very low opinion of it. And of course, some of the ICE products were quite sloppily done in the past, and he has things that he can point to with that obviously things could have been done better. But I think even if he had seen some of the better things, he would have thought that too. I think that's just where he's coming from as someone whose life has been totally devoted to simply putting out his father's work and making it available to people. But officially, the Tolkien estate, himself and the other inheritors, their main concern is not with role-playing games per se, but just with the commercial use of things from their father's works. Tolkien did sell off the rights to The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, which is what makes all this possible, what made Merp possible as well as everything else. If that's a fact, and Tolkien estate doesn't like it, but they can't do anything about it, and Tolkien Enterprises controls it, and unfortunately, they don't really have an interest in promoting the kind of products and the kind of dedication to role-playing that would really make a good series anymore. So that's why I said
no heart, soul, and purity.
Has Mr. Tolkien and that branch made any legal efforts or financial offers to the others to get that the rights?
Oh yeah. No, they would buy back the rights if they could. But the problem is that it makes too much money, so it will never be bought back.
That's a big cash. That's what it exists for.
Yeah. Tolkien Enterprises is a for-profit organization. It's there to make money, and if they can make $300 million off of Peter Jackson's trilogy, they're not going to be selling it back.
And wasn't there a dispute over TSR using the word hobbits originally?
Yeah.
That with his permission, they were allowed to use the word halfling, which was a reference to one of the books, and they allowed to use that reference.
Yeah, I don't know the history behind that, but I do know they ran into a copyright problem with that because Gary Gygax was pretty hard and fast and free and loose with his grabbing of stuff from various authors.
Well, those days, it wasn't as strict.
Yeah, and it's not just with Tolkien. I mean, he got in trouble with Argonauts for using H.P. Lovecraft stuff. Demigods.
Yeah,
Yes,
they
that too.
got sued over that.
It was a time when everyone borrowed from everyone, and unless you were stingy,
Well, I mean, that's a double-edged sword, because if every person who put, their heart and soul into creating something should have some entitlement to saying how that is used. I mean, so it's a double-edged
That's
thing.
intellectual property, that's how
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean,
Chris?
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that Decipher didn't seem to have an intention to produce many Middle-earth properties.
What's the question?
But despite, and didn't they design other source books and material that were never published?
Yes, Decipher did prepare to publish some source books. These were they were the a Helm's Deep source book, basically a fortress module, and an Isengard fortress module. And I think there may have been one other, which I don't remember which one it was, but essentially there were some books that I edited and I worked on.
What about the Moria?
Yeah, the Moria, yeah. I mean, that was sort of the one exception to the rule that actually it was actually something that had a lot of content to it.
Tell about the restrictions they did. I mean, you told a couple people.
Yeah, that was where the restrictions really became unworkable, I think, because doing a sort like a dungeon source book for Moria, they basically did the same thing that Pete Fenley and the others did for Moria and Merp. But then they also wanted a source book on the history of the dwarves and the 7 dwarven houses. But because the names of the houses aren't given in the Lord of the Rings, I couldn't refer to them. When I knew what they were, but I couldn't refer to them because that would have been illegal. So I had to find a way around that.
Instead of Tolkien Enterprise.
Yeah, and so that really was a big a turnoff in terms of an incentive to do anything for them, because I could be creating great content for Merp unofficially, as we always have, and use all that depth and richness of the world, or I could be doing a very surface level history of the dwarves, in which my main concern is that I not get in trouble for writing something. So you can see how they would have difficulty finding a lot of authors who actually knew what they were talking about to write about it.
I guess my point is, it seems clear to me personally that Decipher did have intention to produce Middle-earth products, but failed to produce them instead of not intending on producing them.
Yeah, well, again, I can't speak with knowledge on this. I can only speak on guesswork. I think probably that they did, if they had made $1 zillion on it, they might have been interested in going into more. But again, they started too late. They didn't have support for their products, at least not on time. And I mean, you yourself had some experience working with them on your MerpCon, where they were not very cooperative, right?
I communicated to the president of Decipher, who immediately responded in a very kind fashion and referred me to certain people that were in charge, like Christian Moore and a couple other people who failed to show me the same kind of respect for communication. And then I was in communication with someone named Sean Smallman, I believe, who was in charge of their convention support. And once I mentioned to him Merp, Middle-earth role-playing, and I mentioned it just for that, I guess, acronym, he got offended and responded that he didn't know what I was talking to, and I never heard from him again.
Yeah.
And then I proceeded to organize some Middle-earth games for a couple of MerpCon events, irregardless, using whatever systems, and people ran all kinds of systems. And that was about it as far as my interactions with Decipher.
Yeah, this was a major drawback to people who were Merp players for Decipher, is that for most of us, Decipher was trying to reinvent the wheel, and a wheel that worked very fine and that had been under development for over 20 years. And so to start from scratch and not only that, but to start from scratch in a way that was handicapped by all these restrictions, there's not much hope. Much good. Now, some good things did come out. They have a nice game system, and people who do play Merc have often adapted many rules from that. So that's been positive. But it was a fluke, a single event, rather than something that's sustainable.
Well, I also have some feedback about their system and the book that came out. I guess the original developer, what's his name, Steve Long, made the original game and then left the company. But apparently he used their generic role-playing system called the Coda system. And then once he left, it didn't seem to take them a long time to produce that book. And there were many complaints about lack of original artwork as well.
Well, yeah, that too for their Lord of the Rings role-playing game is. They originally said they were going to keep it separate from the films, but I guess they decided against that when they had, every or almost nearly all the artwork being from the movies, most of it just stills, which pumped the price of all their books astronomically up.
But did it little else.
With very little. I mean, compare it with not this had some content with it, but for some of the other ones, for a 96 page book with not a lot of stuff in it, you were paying what, $30?
Yeah. Right there on the shelf still.
Yeah. So there was so there was an economic dimension there too that I think they're appealing to a very limited kind of market that may have been viable when the movies were coming out, but now that we're on sort of a dip after that, there's not much you can do to salvage that. So I think they realized that very quickly, which is why I think they lost desire to publish this stuff. And from what I do know is the way they treated their playtesters. Basically, everyone who was playtesting or working on it, they left them in lurch. They wouldn't answer emails asking what's going on. That just, we're not going to tell you. And people eventually figured out that they didn't have any interest in continuing because they weren't doing anything or answering any emails or any communications with their own people. So it was not a happy situation.
Do you know anything about what happened when Decipher let go of their, middle role-playing team?
What I do know about the Decipher license is that it was not like the ICE license. It was for 5 years with the potential to renew it for another 5 years. So they basically had it from 2000 to 2005, and apparently that's when they just decided, no, we're not going to renew it.
So the license is wide open.
So as far as I know, the license is open, but the license that is open is the one where you can't refer to anything from the Silmarillion or anything else, which means, for the people who really care about doing it, no one's going to want to pay the $350,000 or whatever for it.
Now, have they made, call Tolkien Estates and ask them, can we license the rights to reference this stuff?
I'm sure that people, that Tolkien Enterprises has tried to buy the rights to the Silmarillion, but it's not going to happen.
Christopher
Never.
Tolkien will
It will never happen. No, I mean and it's kind of sad because it would be kind of cool to have Silmarillion map, a Silmarillion film maybe someday.
Yeah, many films.
So.
Now, and just a totally unrelated question, I've heard, just strictly rumor, that they're making the movie of The Hobbit. That Christopher Jackson's actually making
I'm sure Line will eventually do that. I'm sure they'll eventually do that because
they promised that there were going to be 5 movies made by 2010. One of which would be made in 2005, one in 2008. Wait, when was
I haven't heard anything.
when was the Return of the King made?
That was 2003, I believe.
2003?
Yeah.
Well, there were, they said by 2010, the other 2 movies they have planned are going to be done.
What are they?
I don't.
Chris, to get back to the gaming question, just for grins, for the gaming convention.
Sorry.
Rollmaster and later Merp are very comparable and in many ways superior systems to advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which is what they were compared to, or Boot Hill, or whatever. But nowadays we do have some more modern stuff going on. I'm not saying D20 is perfect, but there are some things out there that are quite fascinating. What do you see as the future for Middle-earth?
In terms of system compatibility and things like that?
Or, because the D6 system, HARP is ICE's in-house system now.
Well,
What would you...
my forecast.
Oh, here we go.
My forecast for this is that there will not be one system that people who want to play Middle-earth will use. I think that the D20 system, like the stuff that Hawk and others have been working on, I think that has a lot of prospects simply because it's becoming a kind of common tongue, among gamers, and any system, any rule concept that can be translated from one world to another without a lot of changes means that people who learn it more people will be playing in a world that has a Die-20 system for it. So I think that has the most prospect, but I think part of the answer is demographic. I think part of the answer is who is going to be playing this game, because many of us are of an older generation. We lived through the heyday of the 1980s with Merc when D&D was king and all this, and we don't need to be convinced that this is a fun thing to spend our time doing. But I think a lot of people in the younger generation are going to be more interested in card games and things like that. And unless they're interested in traditional role playing per se, the system's not going to change their interest that much. But I do think that the D20 system is a great idea. But as I said, I think that there won't be one system. I've never used Merc, which is why I'm essentially Merc literate. I understand the concept, but I couldn't start running. I use RuneQuest. I use the basic Chaosium system for the same reason as D20, because it's a very flexible system. I started playing it in 1980, and since I started my campaign before ICE got started, I just used that instinctually, and I've always used it. And partly I haven't found a need to change because my own running style is very non-game mechanics oriented and very improvisational, so all I need is a few rules and then I just go with it. But yeah.
Is there any online source for RuneQuest? Because, I
wouldn't be
personally, I have never, don't even think I've ever even seen a
Well, we just
RuneQuest
Googled
book.
for it.
It's been around.
It's out of print, but I mean the Chaosium system, the basic rule ideas that were used for RuneQuest, I think they have a basic role-playing system that I think they still publish it.
What year did it come out?
That would have been like 76 maybe.
Yeah, because I was born 81, so
Yeah.
it's not
Well,
familiar.
Call of Cthulhu, that's the same system.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
The original Call of Cthulhu.
Right, not the D20.
Now the D20. No, it's a percentile system, but it has D&D 1 to 20 stats. Basically, that's how it works.
Now, my next question is, I understand how a lot of people realism and keeping to Tolkien's vision is really important. But in some aspects, keeping it, right in line with the books and playability aren't always going together. Like my issue is the magic system. It's like how the D20 magic system works in Dungeons and Dragons and how it's portrayed in The Lord of the Rings are, completely at the opposite end of the spectrum. And I understand Hawk's zeal for authenticity, but playability has to have a say in that. Because, like you said, for the new players who have to be convinced, the simpler the better. Because once you can hook them with the simple stuff and they're like, oh man, this is great, then you can add the layers. But to begin with, I'm just wondering what your position on is on authenticity and playability.
We also call that purism, Tolkien purism and playability. my personal position on that from my own experience is that there is no conflict. It's all a matter of what expectations do people come to a game with. Because Middle-earth is a fantasy world, people come to it with the expectations of D&D. That's the expectation.
Yeah.
So, and that's why most attempts to create a system for it incorporate, especially in Magic and things like that, some basic assumptions about what players are going to want to do. On the other hand, and that's a perfectly valid point, it's a very realistic point. On the other hand, there are games out there that operate on totally different premises. People don't come to them with the expectation that if I can't do this, it won't be fun. Wheel of Time,
Radically different Magic.
Call of Cthulhu.
That's the books. Call of Cthulhu.
Call of Cthulhu, no one goes into Call of Cthulhu, wanting people to cast spells because they know what they do. They're in trouble. But anyway, my point is simply that the problem of playability versus authenticity is less a problem with the world itself than what people are coming to it wanting to do. And it all depends on how you build that, basically.
And I mean, from my perspective, like you said about the D20 and the system, that's becoming widespread. And let's just say 95% of people are, if they're going to have been exposed to any system in the past, it's probably going to have been the D20 system.
Yep.
So that's that's going to be a generally widespread expectation. So I've had exposed to this, so this is what I'm expecting.
Yeah, just in terms of the kind of rule concepts, certainly a D20 is where it's probably going.
Something I wanted to talk about before we went on to the system that we started to talk about was it was a precedent set by ICE with MERP that you didn't really see anywhere else per se except one other area. I can't remember if it was Chaosium or Games Workshop who did the Thieves World box. Anybody remember Thieves World? Was that Chaosium or?
Chaosium did Thieves World, yeah.
Okay. And the neat thing they did about that is it was basically system agnostic. So you had all the Thieves World books, and they had source books and all the NPCs, and then they had the hero system, the AD&D system, the Rollmaster system, FASA, and they had several different systems in there. But that was in the back of the book. The emphasis throughout all the other books was the storyline, the plot, the environment, the place, the campaign. They did the same thing with MERP, although here and there they're sprinkled in system things.
Yeah.
Overall, it's the source material, the environment, the campaign.
Yeah.
And my hope is that slowly over time, all of this Tolkien material, because Tolkien stuff is system agnostic. Everybody else is trying to bolt a system onto it. Unlike a lot of the D&D stuff, which is built specifically to fit the game systems and stuff and to feed the gaming industry machine. Tolkien was written as a world to play in, and you can use whatever system you want. Each GM will pick and choose what they want.
Yeah,
but this is source material, the maps, etc., the storylines, the scenario ideas that need to be brought up.
Well, to be honest, when Tolkien wrote the books, I don't think he even imagined role-playing in his works.
He didn't even think the Hobbit anybody would want to buy the Hobbit, and he was totally shocked.
But what you say is absolutely correct, and that's what I meant when I said there won't be one system.
Right, exactly.
And what I would want to add to that is that for those of us who are interested either in playing or in developing Middle-earth as a role-playing setting, we should not. I don't think it's a good idea to judge our success or failure as to whether we come up with a coherent system to play in that everyone will agree on.
Exactly.
And I think and that's why I say I think one of the where things will be most productively done, things that will be most valuable for people, are what I call mid-level resources, not a giant overview of a game system, because everyone will use whatever the hell they want.
Exactly.
But rather things like Hands of the Healer, like people want to have interesting things for a physician to do, and you won't get that from any core rulebook. You won't get that kind of detail. Or people want to have cool maps. People used to buy the MERP modules even if they didn't play MERP because they just wanted the maps to play with. So I think those kind of resources are what we should judge our progress on. And there's a lot to do still.
IC did a lot covering 3rd Age, 1640 onward through early 4th Age. There's a lot of material there, but there's almost nothing pre-1640. There's a few here and there, And there's really nothing first and second age. It just doesn't exist, and it would be wonderful to see all of that.
Has anybody ever approached, to your knowledge, Tolkien Estates about doing something completely separate that is just based on similarly in the first and second
I'm
age?
sure people have, but
They
they tried and died.
Tried and failed.
They tried and died. But you know, there was, for example, well, here, let's go back to the most intelligent man in the universe, Gary Gygax. In his famous column, editorial that he wrote upon the silliness of Lord of the Rings, he said that the fundamental problem with the Lord of the Rings as a game setting is that there's nothing to do. Because the adventure has been solved. There's nothing to do in this world, so it can never be used as... And this is right before ice, obviously. So he has to eat his words now, but...
Because there was a main plot doesn't mean that there's other subplots or other intricacies that people who obviously do not have the ability to discern, observe but not discern, says that the perception is limited, rose-tinted, and narrow-minded.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And it's not just the vast background, it's also the unexplored territory of the Fourth Age. Like, Tolkien himself wrote a sequel, started a 5-page sequel to The Lord of the Rings a generation later. What was going on? So he was thinking about things that might happen. Things that might happen later on, and with exception of one module, no one has done anything on the Fourth Age. And you know, one of the other sort of tensions that people have often seen in working with the Lord of the Rings world is it's not so much the playability, but it's the idea that it's a totally predetermined history. You know, you can't change history, which, you know, from a game master's perspective is rubbish. If you want your players to change history, let them.
Exactly.
But at the same time, no one observes, of course, that history goes on after the War of the Ring. And there's plenty of things that you can do.
Okay, now my question is concerning Numenor. It talks about the creation, and there were in the first song there were 3 themes. Now did Iluvatar have the Ainur sing a new song, which would be considered the 4th theme for EA when Lord of the Rings was finished, or what constituted the Fourth Age?
Well, the themes that were added on. This is in the Song of Creation and the Creation Myth. The themes that were used to counteract Morgoth's chaos, his discord, were essentially elves and human beings. Those were the 2 major themes that were added in by Iluvatar. And so those don't represent ages, but they represent the races that were not created by the
That
Valar.
sort of implies the ages. There were 3 themes, hence 3 ages. So that technically
there's
is
more
a
than 3 ages.
misconception.
More than 3 ages.
Oh, I'm sorry. But I just want to make sure that was just a misconception that some people get from reading. Okay.
No, there are more than 3 ages, so there's plenty to do after the books, as it were, as well as before them, and during them.
So what can people do?
So what can people do? Well, all I can say is what I do. I do an online game, and I use this material, which will eventually be on the website, to create this kind of mid-level resources, things about questions like new magic ideas, powers for characters, plot lines, things that I'm not just thinking in the abstract, but that I'm actually running in my game. Using my own campaigns to create more background history and plot lines for games as well. That's what I do.
So do you have a website for that?
Not yet. I have another website for Other Hands. Most of it is now on
websites though.
otherhands.com. Most of it's on merp.com though now.
Now, all your, I understand about your magazine that you publish, and you got shut down by the power, Iron Fist Command, Rescue. But is there any place, now those are all on your website, but is there actually any place where you can actually get the hard copies anymore that you would know of? I mean, eBay?
No. They may be on eBay, but it's not worth getting because you'd be paying through the nose. And you can get PDFs of them now in hard copy PDFs.
Have any, you don't have.
I only have my own personal set.
They're not actually from me, they're from MerpCon.
Merp.com.
Okay.
And then one last question for clarification. Now, LOR that existed back in 93-96, obviously for the new D20 LOR, what are the differences between the two? Because Merp consistently talks about LOR, it has nothing to do with the D20 LOR.
Yeah. LOR is the abbreviation for Lord of the Rings Adventure Game. 5 minutes. It was ICE's attempt to do a kind of generic, simple system, and they produced 2 adventures to go along with it. It was like a very structured campaign, which was supposed to be for beginners. And it's essentially doing the same thing that Decipher did with their first, the Moria adventure they did, where you have a much simplified version of their, yeah.
Now, you know that Moria campaign you said you worked on? Is there any place where you can actually get, get that, online or anywhere?
So thanks very much, and let's game.
Thank you.